Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier, and thanks again for stopping by. I do appreciate that. I did an interview with Beatrice Gachenge of CNBC Africa yesterday regarding the first year of President Kenyatta's administration. The link is on Rich Wrap-Ups if you care to have a look, all on the front page. And I couldn't resist taking a selfie with Maya, who is the new CNBC Africa Kenya Bureau Chief, extremely erudite and always an interesting conversation before I go in for my interview. So thank you, Maya. It was a pleasure also participating in the launch of the Mandarini project at the Sankara yesterday. That was a lot of fun. I wish them well. Mindspeak, the session with the East African Secretary General, Dr. Richard Sesibera, has been uploaded on Rich TV. My home thoughts turn to my daughter Hannah. Happy birthday, Hannah. And she's brought enormous amounts of happiness in my life, I must admit, and sometimes I just like holding her very tight. And she does indulge me, although she doesn't like it, as she's told me. I didn't manage to read more Paul Theroux yesterday, but I found this quotation: "You go away for a long time and return a different person. You never come all the way back." I like this photograph. When the lights were off following Hurricane Sandy, a photographer used a helicopter to capture the breadth of Manhattan's power outage following Hurricane Sandy. Political reflections. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel does China, meeting the Chinese President Xi Jinping at the Great Hall of the People in Beijing. I'll upload that. Of course, the Indian election has started. I think this man, Narendra Modi, is going to win this all ends up. I, for one, do not like the sectarian tone, Modi's sectarian tone, but I think he's essentially a winner in the electoral side. David Ignatius talks of Putin's borrowed playbook. The West has made NATO's military alliance the heart of its response to Russia's power grab in Ukraine, but we may be fighting the wrong battle. The weapons President Vladimir Putin has used in Crimea and eastern Ukraine look more like paramilitary covert action than conventional military force. Putin, the former KGB officer, may in fact be taking a page out of America's playbook during the Ronald Reagan presidency, when the Soviet Empire began to unravel thanks to a relentless US covert action campaign. Rather than confront Moscow head-on, Reagan nibbled at the edges by supporting movements that destabilized Russian power in Afghanistan, Nicaragua, Angola, and finally Poland and Eastern Europe. It was a clever American strategy back then, pushing a wounded Soviet Union and opportunistically exploiting local grievances wherever possible. And it's an equally clever Russian approach now, offering maximum gain at minimum potential cost. The parallel was drawn for me this week by John McGuire, a former CIA paramilitary covert action officer who served in the Contras program in Nicaragua and later in the Middle East. At the end of the day, Putin is a case officer, says McGuire. He watched what we did in the 1980s, and now he's playing it back against us. From the beginning in Crimea, Putin ran the campaign there as a black operation. Russian troops wore no insignia to preserve a fig leaf of deniability. Russian officials, from Putin on down, insisted they weren't seizing Crimea, even as their forces consolidated positions. They controlled information flows and coordinated their messaging. My conclusions are Putin is extremely geopolitically subtle, and that's seen in the way he turned around the whole R2P concept in his favor over Crimea. But closer than the Reagan analogy, I would draw the Obama analogy. If you look across the Arab Spring, you look at events that preceded this Crimea annexation, President Obama has deployed very subtle tactics, leading from behind, but essentially sort of pulling the strings. And I think Putin has learnt from President Obama rather than President Reagan. Nell, she's doing everything to make you happy. It's all about you, Pistorius. In an interview with the UK's Daily Mirror newspaper, her mother June said the apology left me unmoved. I knew it was coming. She says he's been very dramatic, the vomiting and crying. I don't know whether he's acting. Put up a photograph of Reva Steenkamp. The African warlord Kony stays elusive despite offensive, this is a report in the Wall Street Journal. On a routine foot patrol in December, Ugandan troops bumped into a dozen fighters belonging to the world's most wanted warlord, Joseph Kony. After a 15-minute shootout, the rebels vanished into the jungle of neighboring the Central African Republic, taking with them a chance to catch him. Over the past 2 decades, Mr. Kony has led hundreds of fighters of his lord's resistance army across northern Uganda, South Sudan, Congo, and the CAR, killing at least 100,000 people and abducting more than 20,000 children, according to Christian Aid. Talking about the Invisible Children 30-minute internet video titled Kony 2012, for nearly 3 years, Mr. Kony and scores of his fighters have eluded a US-backed offensive in the jungles of Central Africa. Lieutenant Colonel Paddy Ankunda, Uganda's military spokesman, says Kony and his fighters are consistently on the run. They have adopted animal-like survival instincts. Colonel Kevin Leahy, he has lost fighters, he has lost the grip on his organization. He doesn't go on the offense, he hides. In March, the US dispatched 4 long-range tilt-rotor aircraft CV-22 Ospreys, as well as cargo and refueling planes. On Tuesday, General David Rodriguez, the head of Africa Command, said the US has begun to pull out the additional aviation assets and could return once the African Union Regional Task Force hunting for Mr. Kony develops new leads on his whereabouts. Mr. Kony sees himself as a prophet of God. Those who track him say his elusiveness owes more to evolving guerrilla tactics. He's been very savvy on how he has maneuvered these forces for as long as he had. He's also pretty paranoid. And counted, so basically some defections happening. One recent defector said he was kidnapped when he was 10 and spent the past 15 years in the bush. No one wants to victimize the same people twice. He will look at you in the eyes and tell you that he is aware of your plans to escape. Capturing Mr. Kony remains a tall order. During the battle in December along the bank of the Warra River, Ugandan troops wounded several rebel fighters, including Okot Odiambo, Mr. Kony's deputy. I think there is a wider context to that insertion regarding Kony because it sort of legitimizes US Africa Command, its presence on the continent, and what remains a decisive hard power advantage that the US has. Currency markets Euro 138.48. The Euro is up about 1% on the week and well above a low of 136.72 that it hit last Friday. Dollar index now back at 79.53. Hit a 3-week low at 79.43, well below a 7-week high of 80.599 set last Friday. The yen firmer at 101.76, Swissy 0.8795, the pound 167.95, just below just below a level set earlier this year. Let me get to that. I can't find it right now, but this is a multi-year high. Aussie 0.9408 rose as high as 0.9440, which was the highest level since last November. India rupee 60.255, South Korean won at a 5-year high, 1039.51. The rial 2118.62. Egyptian pound 697.51, and the South African rand, which I think will now go to 10, is at 1040. The dollar index, I'll put up a 3-month chart of that. The price action is shocking. The Bloomberg dollar spot index touched 1,470, which was the lowest since October 30th last year. The FOMC minutes were dovish. A lot of folks thought rate hikes would come sooner after that comment that Yellen made, talking about a 6-month time lag from the end of QE to the first rate rise. but I think those expectations have receded after those minutes were released. Euro dollar, I'll put up a 3-month chart there. That's coming back strongly, 138.48. Sterling, 167.95. I'll put up a 1-year chart. Touched 168.23 on February the 17th, and that was the highest level since 2009. I think you cross that, and you're going to rush up to like 173.50. And I spoke about this on the 2nd of August 2013 when I said I think you need to be net long sterling. The Australian dollar, I'll put up a 1-year chart of that, and as I said, that's the highest since November. I couldn't resist this. A year after Nicolas Guesquier's reign ended at Balenciaga, the news that he would succeed Marc Jacobs at Louis Vuitton's creative director touched off a rare hullabaloo in the fashion world. What daring, what a triumph. And I like this quote of his: what I find most interesting in fashion is that it has to reflect our time. You have to witness your own moment. People used to define me as a futurist designer, but you know, the future is now for me. Up a photograph of him on the terrace of the Louis Vuitton headquarters. Coming to commodity markets, gold, I'm going to put up a 1-year chart. That's ticked higher. That's last at 13.1636. I remain bearish. I think we've already seen the 2014 high. The weak dollar, I think, has squeezed crude oil right up here to 103.29. Contract rose $1.04 yesterday, closed at the highest level since March 3. Prices are up 5.2% this year. I think it's a squeeze. Bacon eaters, brace yourselves. Prices are rising up to 7%. The prices have risen up to 7% since May, thanks to a new virus that has already killed millions of baby pigs. I like this dish of seawater cured Kentish mackerel, orachi, and broccoli, courtesy of Claridge's. I'll put up a 1-year chart of the South Korean won. That's at a 5-year high. Pakistan issued a $1 billion 5-year bond yielding 7.25%, and a $1 billion 10-year bond yielding 8.25% on Tuesday received $7 billion in orders. The interesting point to note, and why I bring it up, is that 10-year note was priced with a lower yield than the 8 5/8 Zambia paid on a $1 billion 10-year bond on Monday. And by the way, Pakistan is rated CAA1. Zambia is rated B+. Coming to Sub-Saharan Africa, I couldn't resist this. This increase in smartphone penetration rates leads to the expectation that mobile data demand per user in Sub-Saharan Africa will increase from approximately 0.08 GB per month in 2012 to 0.45 GB per month in 2016. This translates into a mobile data growth of an average of 119% per year. Smartphone usage in Sub-Saharan Africa is expected to surge by 40% each year until 2017. Given a demand for mobile broadband internet in most African countries will likely be driven by the rise in local content, development of new mobile applications, and the growth of social media platforms. I wrote about this in that piece I wrote in 2012, Africa's Futures Not Seen in the Rear View Mirror. That's, of course, Vinod Khosla. And I said, I have a supreme conviction that Africa is the last great convergence trade in the 21st century. In many respects, the great flattener was the mobile phone, and with it the mobile internet and the mobile wallet. Where once the continent was adrift and played a different riff, the mobile phone connected the continent to itself and to the rest of the world. It was the phone that was the entry ticket into the game for each and every African. It was a wonderful grassroots, bottoms-up, revolutionary thing, because every African could own one. Mo Ibrahim bagged $1 billion on understanding this simple fact. Sure, the resources in the ground are very valuable, but it was the mobile phone that unlocked the talent of those who walked upon the ground. Without the phone and ICT, Kenya would have posted zero growth over the last decade. The Generation Y are walking around Nairobi surfing the 21st century on their phones. It is a remarkable thing. And with smartphones costing less than $100 now, this is about to tip and accelerate again. The World Bank says that at over $50 billion, Africa's service exports trail all other developing regions. However, it is expanding annually at about 12% on average. NL Green sees Africa as the next big place for renewables. We said, what is the next big region of the world where renewables can grow, and where we can play a role similar to the one we're playing today in Latin America? This is the Chief Executive Officer, Francesco Staracci. Latin America accounted for 28% of the company's added capacity last year. They operate 8.9 gigawatts of hydroelectric, solar, wind and alternative energy power plants. Operations in 16 countries, expanding its reach in South Africa and Morocco, plans to enter Kenya and Egypt, among other nations, in the next 5 years. The Rift Valley, which stretches across Kenya, Uganda and Tanzania, has a huge geothermal potential, and for us geothermal is very important. The South African all shares up 5.71% this year, not too far off an all-time high. Dollar versus rand, I'll put up a 3-month chart. That's now going back towards 10 in my opinion, and I got that opinion, and I sort of mentioned that over the weekend when I said the rand appears to have snapped a more than 12-month downtrend. BNP Paribas started talks to buy RCS Investment Holdings, a South African provider of consumer credit, from Standard Bank Group and Foschini. Interesting comment about what Standard Bank are going to use the additional capital released from the sale to invest in as African operations, where they've got a bigger share of Africa operations in terms of revenue than many of their peers. Egyptian pound at 697.59. Egyptian stock market up 0.83% yesterday. It's up 15.35% this year. It's come off the top since March 25th, but I think it will rally higher this year. Nigerian all shares down 4.42%. Sab Miller's hero taps into nostalgia for Biafra in Nigeria. At the Estate Sports Club in the southeastern Nigerian city of Onitsha, men troop up to the open-air bar and order a bottle of O Mapa, the local name for Sab Miller's hero beer. O Mapa means O Father in Igbo, the language of the area. With its hero bottles bearing the rising sun that appeared on the Biafran flag, Sab Miller is tapping into the area's nationalism. Sab Miller says the presentation of hero beer carries no political motivation. It's aiming to create a local feel for its beverage. In Africa, a lot of it is about indigenizing your products. Hero was developed as a result of deep local consumer insight and positive associations with the Igbo tribe. In response to robust demand for Hero Lager and other drinks, Sab Miller plans to invest $110 million to triple its output capacity at its Onitsha brewery to 2.1 million hectolitres a year. Nigeria, of course, was recently upgraded in terms of GDP. Africa's most populous country with about 170 million people. Continent's second largest beer market after South Africa, growing at an annual volume of 6%. I'm going to put up a photograph of taken at night of gas flaring, outshining everything else in the Niger Delta, except for the lights of Port Harcourt and Benin City. The Ghana Stock Exchange is up 9.13% in 2014, but you're in negative territory when you take into account the SEDI, about which I said the open question is whether Ghana is in the cockpit or whether the markets will simply elbow the government aside. I said that on the 24th of March 2014. Ghana's economy apparently expanded 7.1% in 2013, but inflation is now accelerating. Banking and insurance surged 23.2%, creating overall growth in the services sector of 8.9%. They remain at risk. Currencies 13% plunge against the dollar this year, following a plunge last year. I think things are not under control. They've got to cut the recurrent expenditure component, and I don't think there's a political will to do that. Angola's $5 billion sovereign wealth fund Sub-Saharan Africa's second biggest, has this year made its first investments by buying fixed income securities, but is yet to start financing infrastructure projects, its chairman said. The fund is smaller than Botswana's 6.8 billion Pula fund, but it is likely to become Sub-Saharan Africa's largest shortly due to top-ups estimated at 3.5 billion per year. Jose Filomeno dos Santos, the eldest son of the long-serving President Jose Eduardo dos Santos, told the Reuters Africa Summit the fund would now push on with making investments in the coming months. Angola's Banco BIC eyes expansion in Africa. Isabel dos Santos owns a quarter of BIC Angola. America Amorim, one of Portugal's richest men, also owns 25%. BIC also operates in Portugal, where it bought out and bailed out Bank BPN. They're looking to open an office in China and in Brazil. But the interesting point from looking at that sovereign wealth fund and that story about BIC is the ubiquity of the Dos Santos family in any business in Angola. I'll put up a photograph of Jose Eduardo dos Santos, Angola's president, next to his third wife, Ana Paula dos Santos in Luanda, and Isabel dos Santos' eldest daughter. Industry experts say Ugandan and Kenyan oil exports could reach 500,000 barrels per day. And I've been speaking about this being an oil and gas El Dorado for a while. Oil consumption has doubled in 10 years, and Ethiopia, one of Sub-Saharan Africa's fastest growing economies, and now the region's fifth largest after leapfrogging Kenya. Demand for oil in Ethiopia is seen tripling by 2025. This fellow is described as a Namibian trendsetter, Louis the Vintage Guru. I thought he really is. The FT is carrying a report about how Kenya is going to make its wealth leap with new GDP statistics. Kenya is set to achieve key middle income economic status next month, following a government-led statistical review that is likely to increase the size of the country's economy by a fifth to $50 billion. This follows the review of Nigeria, which was increased to $510 billion, making it the largest economy in Africa. Of course, Kenya is already a regional heavyweight, developing stock market heavily backed by foreign money, consistent domestic consumer-driven growth, and a prospect of a big boost in the next few years from oil and gas. So it'll be interesting. The interesting point, actually, Ragnar Gudmundsson is making is that it would most likely give them access to our non-concessional facility, but the amounts are still up for discussion, saying this will increase capacity. Kenya is, of course, readying a $1.5 billion to $2 billion Eurobond 10-year denominated bond Zambia issued earlier this week at 8.625. The shilling, however, shilling sovereign debt in Kenya has returned 6.2% in dollar terms in 2014, the most after Turkey, among 16 emerging markets in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. Economy is forecast to grow 5.5% this year versus 5% in 2013. Talking about the security issues with the Westgate Mall. The country plans to use the debt as an exit strategy from borrowing in the local market. This is the Deputy President, William Ruto. The shilling is down less than 1% this year, 0.3%. Compare that to the cedi, which is down 14%. Of course, tourism is down. It's been very soft. And I wrote about this severally on the 20th of January. I said, this is a Wembley Stadium moment with the Eurobond, which is now imminent. And I wrote then that I think the government should incline to doing the $2 billion. This Eurobond issue will release the pressure cooker that is the domestic bond and interest rate markets. We should see a good rally in interest rates. And that was on the 20th of Jan, and subsequently we've had a marvellous rally. Kenya's deported Somalis, arrested hundreds in a crackdown. Deported 82 Somalis, detained 472 people in the past few days. Kenya's Comcraft Group discuss possible share offerings. This is Dr. Lani Chandaria. Said both the steel and aluminium sections of the family business could go public within the next 2 or 3 years. Ultimately, groups of our size cannot remain only private, he said. Some of our top management still don't think that we're ready for taking it public. I would have taken it public a long time back, he said. The Forbes magazine in 2011 estimated Comcraft to be worth $2.5 billion the last time it valued the business. Chandaria declined to comment on the current value of the group. Over the next 2 years, Comcraft plans to treble the number of factories in Ethiopia to 9, even though in the 70s the regime that overthrew Emperor Haile Selassie also seized the Chandaria business. In Kenya, Chandaria said Comcraft is looking to build several factories and grow 50% over 3 years, targeting expansion in Nigeria, where it already employs more than 4,000 people, saying he's undeterred by the Boko Haram. Yes, it is difficult, it's demoralizing, but you do not see that as a stop. If you live in the sea, you have to live with sharks. He, of course, won a lifetime achievement at the Forbes Person of the Year Awards. That was held at the Kapinski, and I'll put up a photograph of him being given his rewards. I was with him subsequently at a Diageo party, and I took the photograph of Charles Island and Chris Karubi, but Dr. Chandaria was in fact on my left of this photograph you'll see. And during this sort of very nice dinner with lots of whiskey, he turns to me and says, I was the black sheep of the family. And I said, oh, really? And he says, yes, the family sent me to North America to study, and I developed a taste for bourbon. Then he says to me, I gave up drinking more than 40 years ago. We were having our meal. Preceding this exchange with him, he's told the waiter, look, just keep filling up my glass, and I can toast it, and then we'll work out what to do, but I'm not going to drink. By this stage, there are like 4 triples in front of him, and all of a sudden, he just gets up, does a toast, and without thinking, knocks, this triple back. Mrs. Chandaria is a tiny little thing, but I like to think that night that Dr. Chandaria slung her over his shoulder not too much later that evening. We've had a bunch of results from the Nairobi Securities Exchange. Kenol Coble reported a full year profit before tax of 563.918 million. This is from turning it around from a big loss. They slashed net sales 43% from 192 billion and change to 109 billion. What else did they do? The administration expenses were down 42.502%. The key driver in these results was net foreign exchange losses, which were only 105.347 million this time versus 4.605 billion last time. So down 97.712%. Profit before tax 563.918 million versus a loss of 8.964 billion last time. Big turnaround. Earnings per share 0.38 of a shilling versus a loss of 4 shillings and 26 cents before, and they're even paying a 10 cents a share dividend. They're calling it a major turnaround of the company's performance, talking about restructuring, looking at 5 major areas: corporate restructuring, financing costs, operating costs, human resources realignment, and risk reduction. 41% reduction in the workforce from 574 employees to 338 employees. They took deep and decisive action after the 2012 debacle. They slashed turnover 43.027%, workforce 41%. And I think this rebound is further to go, and the recent radical surgery means, P&L will flow onto a lower base, as it were, and of course it does remain in play. I&M Holdings reported full year profit after tax accelerated 20.764%. They increased loans and advances to customers 29.388%. Assets up 18.423%. Profit before tax rose 27.27%. Earnings per share up 19.41%. And they're paying an interim dividend of 2 shillings and 50 cents. I think it's fairly priced versus its peers, but it's trading higher today. Liberty Kenya reported full year profit after tax expanded 28.91%. The share price is up 2.657% this year. They're very solid. They describe their own results as reassuringly sound. And if you look through that, definitely my conclusions are well organized, strong insurance skills. That's evidenced in an 18.2% reduction in full year net insurance benefits and claims, expanding off a low base. I think there's headroom. The Kenya shilling was last trading at 86.60. The Nairobi All Share ticked 0.57% higher yesterday, and it's up 5.1445% this year. The NSE 20 remains in negative territory for the year, down 0.6955%. The mass market, I spoke about this, I think, yesterday, having flopped with its attempt to buy out Naivas, is planning a new outlet at Garden Mall. Yesterday, of course, we had a stronger session, and I'll just briefly go back to the IMF report, which says growth in sub-Saharan Africa remained strong in 2013 at 4.8%, virtually unchanged from 2012. Growth is expected to accelerate to about 5.5% in 2014. So, the macro backdrop was more supportive. The securities exchange had been soft, I think, primarily because of security issues. We've seen a good rally in emerging market currencies, which is also going to support. So Kakuzi was strong yesterday, up 6.19%, but I think that's more a function of what we've seen with Rovi Pingo. People understand that those steep net asset value discounts are going to be ironed out going forward. Safaricom firmed 0.81% to close at 12.45. It's plus 14.74% in 2014, and it's all set to blast through its record closing high of 12.55 set earlier in the year. Kenya Airways ticked 0.3875%, but it's hit some congestion here again. We will clear this area between here and 14.50. The sellers, once they're out of the way, we're going to get a dramatic move. KCB, the firm 0.54% was the most active share yesterday. Diamond Trust was high tipped 7.46%. As well, the interesting point was Sanlam in the Reuters Africa Summit saying they wanted to increase their controlling stake in Pan Africa. Pan Africa rallied 3.305% to close at 125 and is plus over 40% this year. Total, Kenya is strong. I think the oil companies, Total did well. Kenal Kobel has turned it around as well. I'm grateful that you've stopped by, and if you've really listened to it all the way through, I'm doubly grateful. Thank you.